Thank you all for attending our second in our series of creating a fusion out of the confusion. Building on the back of the success of our first webinar, we again are delighted to welcome three industry leaders and knowledge experts. First up, we have Julian Phillips, who is the Senior Vice President of Global Workplace Solutions at AVI-SPL, the world's largest audiovisual integrator and Digicom's global partner. Julian is in, I won't say born and raised in West Philadelphia, but that's where he is right now. And secondly, we have Neil McMahon, who is the Head of Collaboration Technology at Dropbox. Dropbox's mission is stated as, is to design a more enlightened way of working. And Neil will help us understand Dropbox's new toolkit for managing the new workplace of the future. And lastly, but not least, is Laura Phelan. Laura is a Director of Human Capital Solutions at Aon, and she is responsible for working with various organizations on the future of work challenges. Peter Fox will moderate and MC this event. And Peter is Digicom's Commercial Director and our very own knowledge expert. So straight away, I'll hand over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Not sure about the knowledge expert bit, but we'll give it a go. So we're just going to try and, for this session, we're going to have about 10 minutes of each person giving a presentation around their specialist area. I would encourage you all to send instant messages of questions to us. So I am questions to us, because we will be asking the panel after their presentations your questions. So that should happen at around, we think at around 25 past, 1:30. We'll ask them those questions. So please do that. And also at the end of this particular webinar, we're going to have a survey, which we'd love you to fill out and get some feedback from you about the survey and the questions involved. So just to zone in on what we're going to be talking about today, there's two particular spaces that we're going to be talking about. One is digitalization, and what's that all about, the new industrial revolution that's out there. We've all been in the middle of digitalization. You just move on the slide there, Brian, you'll see that part of the digital revolution is the fact that since lockdown, since last March, our meetings have actually increased virtually now by 148%. This is data given out by Microsoft. Our emails have gone up significantly, and we're using an awful lot more instant chat, or instant messaging, should I say, or chat, and sharing and collaborating documents digitally. So that's the part of digitalization that we're familiar with. If you saw Panorama last night, you'd see another aspect of digitalization where China have really nailed it and getting data back on all the movements that their own citizens are making. So we'll expand more on that, and we'll also expand more on the workplace and what the workplace is going to look like when we return to it. Right, if you just move on the slide, you'll see that this information comes from IBEC. They've done a survey recently where, yes, the hybrid model seems to be the one that's most popular by a long shot, a number of 2 or 3 days in the workplace. But also on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see that when are people planning to return to the office, to the workplace? And that does look like the beginning of autumn, end of summer, September time, which is aligned possibly with the government's vaccination rollout. So we'll all be heading back to school and heading back to the office in September. So just move the slides on there, Brian. This is interesting. This came from Edelman on behalf of Microsoft. They've done a survey recently, and they have found out that 47% of employees are considering a career move as a result of the change in the current workplace. So we've suddenly become agile, we've suddenly become a virtual world, we suddenly realize that we don't necessarily have to be in the office or close to the office, and people are considering moves in their career as a result of this new digitalization. Moving on, so just moving on the slide, Brian, just to, as Greg's already explained, I'm going to hand you over now to Julian, who's going to talk about digitalization and the workplace and the revolution that's going on. Neil will have an interesting aspect, one of our clients, in regards to the virtual toolbox and how Dropbox are using this virtual toolbox. And Laura will discuss the culture areas and what needs to be thought about, not just the technology in this move to the new norm. Julian.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everybody. Brian, next slide, please. Thank you. And the next one. Great, perfect. Okay, like you, in West Philadelphia, I have been sat pretty much in my home office for the last 15 months, and I made my first business trip to Florida last week, almost as if COVID had never happened. I just thought I'd let you know that. But one of the things that I've spent my time doing in that 15-month period is speaking a lot to the world of architects, to corporate real estate, and especially to a lot of enterprise customers around the world about what the impact of COVID has been and what their thoughts are about not only return to office, but what the future of work is going to look like. And after all of those discussions and all of that research, I can report back one simple thing: no one knows. So if you are in a situation where you're not yet certain about what it's going to look like or how it's going to shape out, and you're not really sure about how to either get people back or what it's going to look like in the future, don't worry, because we're all in the same boat. But should there be a single answer to the life, universe, and everything, it might be 42. Now, why 42? Well, obviously there's the hitchhiker reference, but let's move on from that. The corporate real estate world, historically pre-COVID, had a planning assumption that about 70% of the employee base would go into an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And that was a planning assumption that was used to size the building, to fit out the floor plan, and decide how many conference rooms they would need. Post-pandemic, or post-vaccine, I should say, and everyone starts to return, the planning assumption is now looking at about 60% of the 70%. And if you do your sums, you'll work out that that means 42%. And what that means is, for the first time in our memory of the modern workplace as we know it, the vast majority, or the majority of our employees are not all going to be in the office all at the same time. Now, that does, as Peter was referring to, indicate that it's going to be a hybrid world, but we're going to actually have to start thinking about what does that mean as far as how do we plan and actually support work and our employees in the best possible way, because everything that we've done prior to this period has not been based on that principle. Now, again, the COVID pandemic has really just highlighted and accelerated the move we're in. And as Peter's mentioned, something has been going on for a number of years. This shouldn't have actually been a surprise that we've been doing a digital transformation. But the one thing that this last 15 months has done is it's created almost like a universal experiment when all organizations as well as people have gone through an event all at the same time. And there's been a number of realizations that we've actually had to come to. And so I think whilst we're thinking about what that means as far as how do we get people back to the office, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, we also need to actually say, well, what does that mean as far as work itself? And so I just want to explore what we've learned so far. So next slide, please. So we've talked about hybrid work and the workplace. And what's been really fascinating is that most people are actually, who've been focused on place, are now shifting their attention to purpose. And what we're beginning to realize when we start to not only interview employees, but also business leaders, is when you say, well, why would somebody come back into an office now? Is it that they need to sit down and do focus work when they can actually do that at home and not have the commute and have work-life balance? Or what are the actual activities that we really need to create an opportunity for people to engage in? And so we're now focused very much on the new workplace purpose and not necessarily place. So place becomes something that needs to adapt and change to support purpose, not the other way around. And the purpose really is centered around these things. So learning and socializing, we're all missing that human connection, that ability to be able to spend time with our fellow human beings, that's really important. The culture that we have within our organization, it's actually being quite strained, as that statistic that Peter shared about 47% of employees may be looking for another job. Employee engagement has been a real problem. Health and well-being, number one priority for most leaders in businesses right now is when our employees come back, we need to look after them better, and we need to create an environment that encourages people not only to be productive, but how they can thrive within the organization and grow, and also connected to the brand of the organization. Who are we as an organization moving forward? And so the workplace itself is not only going to be reconfigured just to accommodate maybe less people coming in all the time. The actual spaces that we create and the technology that supports them is going to be doing different things. And it's going to be very much focused on these kind of activities supporting purpose. And we also have to accept the fact that work is going to happen in the office, at home, or anywhere people are. And we need to figure out the balance of how we support that particular activity. Next slide. I mentioned that we've been doing a lot of research, and one of the most valuable pieces is actually spending time with a lot of our large global enterprise customers. And what I'm sharing with you now, thankfully, is my final slide, but I just wanted to share with you some perspectives from some CIOs we conducted a number of roundtable CEOs from 100 organizations, and Frost actually helped to facilitate that meeting and also summarize the real conclusions. So for those who are technology oriented listening right now, then here are the conclusions that Frost and Sullivan came out with. And I think it's interesting to look behind these particular words and what it actually means. So first of all, the future of workplace. The major conclusion for these CIOs, in other words, what are they thinking about and what are they planning for, is they now need to think about workplace as borderless. And most IT thinking has been very much centered around the workplace itself, and then how do we connect people remotely when they are needed, when they need to. It hasn't necessarily been organized on people can work wherever they are. And there's whole implications for how we organize our networks and security, how we provide access, what is the experience that people have, not only when they're in the office, but what is their experience when they're joining remotely as well. So what we're seeing as a consequence of this is a dramatic acceleration of unified communications. So whether it's Microsoft Teams or whether it's Cisco or Zoom or Google, massive acceleration towards cloud and how that's going to support that borderless workplace. Secondly, meeting equity. And if you think about the experience you have now, I'm full head and shoulders, hopefully good quality audio and video. But when we return back to the office in hybrid mode, that's not the experience we necessarily have with people in conference rooms, with people joining remotely. So we need to think about how we level the playing field. Finally, interop. Another thing happened. It's not just about how do we interact with our employees that's changed. It's also how do we interact with our customers and our suppliers and vendors. And so therefore, although we can build and develop these advanced unified communications and collaboration internally, we also need to interoperate with the rest of the world. And most organizations don't have a very robust interoperability plan. And finally, and most importantly, the employee experience. How do we actually enable our people to be able to engage in this hybrid model and actually get motivated and not get fatigued as we all have been over this last 15-month period? I'm going to summarize by just saying things have happened in 3 phases. First of all, the 15 months that we've had, and some of us are still in it, we've been calling survival mode. And we've pretty much learned a lot about what it took to survive. And we're taking those lessons forward. The second phase, we've been calling MacGyver mode. For some of you who might remember the TV show with MacGyver, making stuff out of balls of string and safety pins, but that's what it's going to be like over the next 9 months. So, don't worry, it is going to be a case of how we get people back to work of how do we piece these things together that we already have, maybe adding some things. But the real opportunity and the real digital transformation is what we call reset mode, very much consistent with the World Economic Forum Great Reset. And this is the point where we really have to accelerate towards what the future is going to be and really embrace these digital technologies, as well as looking after our employees and become human in the way that we design moving forward. And that, Peter, is all I had to share right now. So back to you.
That's great. Thanks, Julian. That was great, and I love that you kicked off by saying like nobody has the answer, because you know this really is a journey that we're going to be on for some time to come. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Neil from Dropbox. So at Dropbox, we're going virtual first, which means for us, remote work will be the primary experience for all of our employees versus being at a desk in an office. But we do still recognize the importance of bringing people together. So we're actually going to recreate our offices as collaboration studios, with teams coming together in person for collaboration, culture building, or to work on a specific challenge, once it's safe to do so, of course. So this toolkit I'm going to speak to you today is a work in progress based on our experiences so far, but we're going to continue to practice, test, and add more content as we learn over the coming months. I'll speak through some of the key elements of the Virtual First Toolkit today, but we've published this externally, so you can find it by searching for Dropbox Virtual First Toolkit if you want to do a much deeper dive into all the topics that I will discuss today. So next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges with virtual first or remote work isn't technology, but rather how teams use it. With people decentralized across time zones and locations, teams really need to think everything around their schedules to their social contracts. And it also means challenging some of our basic assumptions about how great work gets done. So we're all used to the model of a regular working week where teams sit at their desk for 40 hours a week as a measurement of productivity. But instead of measuring how much stuff your team does, so for example, 15 projects, or how present they are in the office, we really need to shift to thinking about measuring the impact of the work that they have and what value that brings to the business. Moving away from lots of meetings to have teams think async by default is another really great opportunity with Virtual First. Virtual First work provides a chance to develop much better habits for your teams. And one of those is replacing quick syncs with asynchronous by default. So going forward, trying to have your team solve problems over email, cloud docs, or chat before reflexively scheduling a meeting. So these kind of behavioral shifts take time, as it's how we've been programmed to work for decades. But as we learn to work virtually, it's a big change, and like we're bound to mess up every now and again. So it's really important to give yourself and your teammates permission to make mistakes, so you can learn from them, iterate, and continue to improve. Next slide, please. So the WHO has called workplace stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. An always-on work culture where technology pings us all day and night plays a massive role in this. With everybody working more flexibly across time zones, there's a real temptation to check in at work all hours of the night. I think we've all experienced it. And teams need to be really thoughtful about how we manage our time. So something we've implemented at Dropbox is the concept of core collaboration hours, where we've set 4-hour collaboration blocks for each region, and we encourage our employees to design their own work schedules beyond that. So collaboration hours doesn't mean just scheduling like 4 hours of Zoom calls, in a row. They just mean being available for synchronous work, responding to teammates, discussing ideas, and collaborating on things at the same time. The concept of a non-linear workday is something I personally love. So outside of core collaboration hours, Dropboxers are encouraged to go non-linear. So this can include moving away from the traditional 8-hour work block to design your work week to suit yourself. So I can break up my working hours across the day, so I can have breakfast with my kids in the morning. I can have some EMEA-based meetings in the morning time. I can take a couple of hours out during the day to collect the kids from school or play some music, and then reconnect in the afternoon or the evening to collaborate with some colleagues in the US. So this freedom to design my own work week allows me to focus my time on the work where I can have the most impact, but also make sure that I continue to have a balance in my personal life. So next slide, please. So sticking with healthy habits can be challenging at the best of times, let alone during a global pandemic and the all new working reality that we're dealing with. Intentionally organizing your workspace and investing in some basic equipment can keep life and work feeling separate, even when they're blended. So admittedly, I do have quite a nice setup here. But it's great for me to be able to step away and pick up a guitar when I'm stressed out to get some headspace, and it's really important that your teams are able to do that as well. Encouraging and promoting a culture where wellness is seen as a priority is really critical in this new work model we find ourselves in. So there's been a lot of talk recently about companies running yoga sessions at lunchtime, but those kind of initiatives are really pointless if there isn't a real culture of wellness where employees feel empowered to either avail of those kind of initiatives or find their own ways to de-stress. So recharging is more critical than ever to prevent teams from burning out, particularly when the lines between work and personal life are so fuzzy. So something that we've implemented at Dropbox that I love is unplugged PTO. So with this, when Dropboxers are booking their time off, they select unplugged PTO in the holiday booking tool, and it automatically disables access to their work tools on their mobile devices. So we implemented this as feedback we heard from Dropboxers was that mobile was the biggest source of putting them back into work mode while they were off. I think we all know it can be so tempting to just click on an email or Slack icon when you're on holidays or late in the evening. And it really helps Dropboxers to disconnect and recharge. Next slide, please. So supporting your team. You don't have to be an executive to meaningfully impact your team's well-being and productivity. So everybody from new employees to senior executives to individual contributors can help their teams to thrive in a virtual first context. And ultimately, everybody at the company is responsible for building and contributing to the culture that they want to be a part of. At Dropbox, we're really committed to supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion across all of our organization. And another great thing about Virtual First is it's opened up so many more locations for us to hire great talent from. Going Virtual First also means being even more intentional about how teams develop and support each other, and ensuring that tasks and projects are assigned fairly, performance reviews are equitable, and ensuring meetings are inclusive so all voices can be heard, and those behaviors and practices have to be modeled all throughout the organization. The principles of great management rarely change, but when we're working virtually, we notice their absence even more acutely. So if you find yourself in a leadership position, it's really important, some very simple tips, really get to know your team, model psychological safety, create an atmosphere of trust across the organization, become a good coach, help your teams to grow, recognize and rewarding your team. It can be very easy to overlook achievements when distributed, which can be incredibly demotivating for a team and very hard to spot. And finally, just be responsive and engaged with your team. It signals that you care and really helps your own teams to keep engaged in turn. Next slide, please. So finally, effective communication with distributed teams is crucial, especially taking time zones and async workflows into consideration. So Virtual First means going async by default and solving problems with collaboration tools like Dropbox Paper or over email or Slack before we flexibly schedule a meeting. But when most of our interactions are mediated by screen and text, it can be very easy to misinterpret each other. So we really have to go out of our way to be clear, warm, and inclusive in how we communicate. I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of a confusing document, a too long email, or a terror Slack message. At best, these can lead to confusion. Worst case, it makes you wonder, why is Carol and McMahon so mad at me? In a virtual first world, writing to be understood, not just heard, is more important than ever. A simple question like, why did you make that decision? Can come across as perfectly benign in person, but it can feel very threatening over Slack or email, where we can't read facial expressions or vocal tone. Avoid misunderstandings by using emotionally intelligent language. Tackling your tools. So, we all have loads of apps at our disposal, and it's great to have choices, but at times, tool proliferation can lead to death by 1,000 Slack messages or Gchat or emails. To do our best work virtually, teams will need to establish new norms around which tool to use for which type of work. For example, at Dropbox, we use Slack for quick real-time and async conversations, Dropbox Paper for collaborating on documents, and Zoom when we really need to have a meeting. And speaking of meetings, while they're one of the main ways that we catch up with teammates and we can keep moving projects forward, they're also one of the worst ways that we waste time and money. So it's really important to do meetings right when we're async by default. So we have guidelines in our toolkit to make Dropboxers really consider what merits calling a meeting. And we actually actively encourage Dropboxers to decline unnecessary meetings where possible. When Dropboxers do need to schedule a meeting, we again have guidance around how they can make them effective, from ensuring there's a clear agenda, considering time zones, and sending out pre-reads in advance. All of these are very simple tips, but all with the intention of shifting people's mindsets to ensure we can maximize time for our teams to actually get work done. So thanks for listening. I hope you found some of these tips from the toolkit interesting. If you'd like to read more, just search for Dropbox Virtual First Toolkit. You can check it out in more detail. And with that, I'll pass you over to Laura.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for that. And I really love your idea of being able to decline meetings. I think it's a skill maybe we'll all need to develop in the next little while. So look, I'm going to pick up on many of the themes that both Neil and Julian have raised already, all under the umbrella of future of work. And in my work at Aon in Human Capital Solutions, this whole idea of the future of work and trying to create some clarity and understanding of the future of work is probably the biggest and most important topic that our clients are coming to talk to us about. So I just thought today I would share some of our own thinking and our approaches with our clients to help them through this challenge. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Brian. I think that when we look at the world of work, there's no doubt that change is constant and has been constant over the last number and many years. But what's unique about what's happening at the moment is that the change that we're experiencing is significant and it's fast, but it's also hitting us in three different areas. It's hitting us in terms of where we work in the future, what we do in the future, and how we do that. And so I'm going to deal with all three of those, because in order to be able to build a resilient, sustainable workforce, it's really important to provide as much clarity as possible around those three fundamental components of the future world of work. And so if you look at the right-hand side of my slide, that's all about the where we work, and more we're hearing these headlines from different organizations about what their future working model is. And everything from Goldman Sachs CEO talking about working from home being an aberration, and the sooner everybody can come back into the office, the better, because that's the way that they thrive as an organization, right through to Spotify saying that they let employees work from anywhere while still paying the likes of San Francisco, New York type salaries. So you've got every extreme of working model and lots of different headlines around it. And that, I suppose, is making organizations nervous in a way, but also recognizing the need to decide what their own preferred working model is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the where in a few minutes. In terms of the what, there's some statistics there that the World Economic Forum has identified that 14% of the global workforce will need to change occupational category by 2030. This is as a result of things like the digital revolution, the impact of automation, and the whole creation of new roles. And that there's an estimation that 9% of the global workforce in 2030 will be in occupations that don't currently exist. And that 2030 does not feel that far away. But when you think about it, even just a few years ago, there weren't roles such as, virtual reality consultant or YouTuber, as my children now seem to aspire to be. And that automation itself is likely to displace about 800 million jobs by 2030. So what we do in the workplace is also going through a fundamental change. And then finally, a couple of thoughts around how we work. And more organizations, in a study that Aon carried out recently, 83% of organizations globally are saying that diversity, equality and inclusion is going to be very or extremely important in how they define their own future of work. And that compares with only about 48% of organizations saying that what their competitors are doing is important for them as they define future of work. So what that is saying is that organizations recognize they need to build the right future for themselves and their colleagues and their workforce, not necessarily just looking at what competitors are doing. And then finally, when we look at hybrid working, and both Neil and Julian have outlined and recognized that most workplaces are going to have at least some level of hybrid working, that in itself is going to drive the need for different types of leaders and making sure that we create sustainable leaders that will succeed and thrive in the new environment. So that, I suppose, is just the where, the what and the how. And I was just going to briefly talk through some of our approaches and our learnings under each one of those. So Brian, if you could go to the next slide, which is about getting the future working model right. This is the where. And the feedback from organizations is really saying that getting that model right is critical. And the factors that they're thinking about are things like company culture and talent availability. So making sure that the model is attractive so that people will want to work for that organization while not diluting who they are as an organization as well. So they're the two critical factors. And our approach really is to take a data-driven driven approach. So looking at two main sets of data in trying to work out what is the ideal working model for you, your organization and your workforce going forward. The first is looking at the roles itself and the tasks within that role and working out what is the best environment. So what roles need to be done on site that need collaboration, innovation, creativity and so on, versus what are the tasks that are better done working from home, for example, analysis, report writing, those kind of things. So we have a model that can run the different roles of an organization through the model to work out what's the best actual place for them to work and in what percentage of time. So maybe 1 to 2 days per week in the office or 3 to 4 days per week and so on. And then we would usually layer that data with some individual colleague data to understand, again, how will individuals thrive within a different model. So it could be that your role could be done quite well remotely, but you personally will thrive better in an office environment. So for us, it's combining those two sets of data for a leader to then have a better insight into what's going to be the best sustainable model going forward. So it's not just about getting a headline 3 days per week in the office. It's about really understanding with the makeup of my workforce and the way that people are going to thrive, this is the breakdown of how we will spend our time. And from that then there's different decisions that can be made around real estate and the configuration of space and so on. But the starting point is taking that data-driven approach. So that's the getting the working model right. If you go on to the next slide, Brian, please, it's about thinking about what will people be doing in the future. So I just thought that the way to bring this to life best was maybe to talk through a client example that we have, which is Siemens, where they recognize that of their 300,000 colleagues in the workforce, about 30,000 roles were going to become obsolete within the next 5 years. So rather than running a massive redundancy program and then having to recruit in new people for these new types of data analyst type roles and project management roles, they defined what the roles were going to be and then set up a kind of a self-service app where all colleagues could log in, do a few ability assessments, personality questionnaires, interest inventories and so on, and they would get immediate feedback as to what types of new roles might they be suited to, and in order to position them to take advantage of those new roles, what learning and development would they need to do. So what I suppose this was allowing people to do is get a sense of what does the future hold and how can I position myself to best take advantage of the roles that are coming in the future. So I suppose again it's about creating some clarity for people and giving them the ability to self-direct, to take advantage of the opportunities that were coming next. And one of the results was the uptake in training went from about 88% to 95%. So people really appreciated and took advantage of that. And then just finally, if you move on to the next slide, Brian, the how we work. So again, you know, we've talked about hybrid workforce. Well, what does that mean for how I interact with colleagues? And Neil in his toolkit talked a lot about some of the skills that are going to need to change in how we manage ourselves and how we manage how we interact with other people. And so I suppose when we're thinking about the how, on the left-hand side, this digital readiness is thinking about how do individuals within a workforce really understand and really, I suppose, have the skills to navigate through the digital world of work. And then on the right-hand side, thinking about, well, what is it that the leaders are doing? How are they including people? How are they creating a kind of an inclusive culture within the organization to make sure that within a hybrid model, people are not feeling excluded, left out, or ignored or becoming invisible? So I suppose in recognition of the fact that hybrid workforces are going to require both individuals and leaders to behave differently in order to get those amazing advantages around productivity and collaboration and engagement, we need to make sure that both individuals are set up and understand what those skills are, and leaders are set up and supported in developing the skills of the new working world, understanding what the definition of those behaviors are and how they need to learn and develop and create those for themselves. So I suppose that's my key three themes around the what, the where, and the how. And I hope there's some useful insights for you on that. And maybe, Peter, I'll hand back to you now at the end of my talk.
Thanks very much, Laura. And thanks very much, panel. There were three great presentations. If the others would like to pop in as well. Very relevant, guys. And we're getting a lot of nice feedback from the people listening in, viewing in. Just to remind people that the you can IM a message in or IM a question in. It's on the right hand side of your screen. You should be able to type in a message there and we'll receive it and see if we can ask the panel. We've had some coming in already. Just in regards to something that's quite relevant and current at the moment, should I say, we had an announcement here this morning of a financial institution which is creating 180 jobs in a technology investment, and they will all be working on the hybrid model. They're promoting this fact that the organization will be working, it's a bank, and it'll be working on the hybrid model. And just something that's very contentious here at the moment is obviously the cyber attack recently on our health service. And I'm just going to ask, how will we prevent this in the future as we become more agile and digitalization becomes such a dominant part of our working environment? Probably Julian or Neil, if you could think about that.
Sure.
Neil.
Sorry, Julian. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously from a Dropbox perspective, security has always been one of the most core parts, one of our core values because of the nature of our business. So like people's and users' privacy and their protecting their data is critical for us. So it's always been a massive focus. I mean, with the shift to virtual first for us and with the shift to remote working, we've gone from the model, and I think we've all talked about it, of, you know, supporting 5 offices to 5,000 offices, or, you know, how many number of staff that you have. Ultimately, the weakest link, sadly, in the security chain is always the user. So I think making sure that the experience for the user is a good one, where they don't need to think about security, is critical. You know, because we can't have that dependency on expecting users to do the right thing, because it's too much to ask. So we try and design our systems in such a way that they don't need to think about security. That's our problem to solve. So solutions like zero trust networks, you know, multi-factor authentication as defaults, you know, putting as many barriers and guardrails in place so that you can protect the company is crucial.
Okay.
Just adding to that, Neil's point there, let's just reflect on what's actually happened in the last 15 months. The whole world basically went and worked remote, and if it wasn't for highly available broadband internet and cloud services, we wouldn't have survived in the mode that we've managed to do so. Business continuity wouldn't have been enabled. So the world has learned a very valuable lesson, and that is accelerate to the cloud. And I think when you start looking, I agree with Neil that most security risks are actually based on individual behavior, but they're also down to some, when we talk about hybrid, we talk about a lot of those legacy systems that are not in the cloud, that are actually creating loopholes within their infrastructure. And it's most security problems happen in client server architectures, quite frankly, not necessarily in cloud. So I think one of the things that a big lesson is accelerate to the cloud, because it's a lot easier to secure data and access and services in a pure cloud model than it is when you're actually working with a lot of legacy infrastructure. So I fully expect that we're going to see a significant expansion of cloud. And I think a lot of organizations, because I hear this all the time, especially from banks, oh, we don't go to the cloud, it's not secure. Oh, really? So, you know, I think a lot of those kind of old legacy messages, I think they're going away.
Okay. We just have a question in for probably more Laura, or feel free to others to answer as well. It's just in regards to younger people with the hybrid model, and the need to be present for social purposes and for learning purposes. Just how is that going to be managed in the new norm?
Yeah, interesting. So in some of the work we've done recently with one of our clients, when we ran the model first, we had expected that the kind of junior new joiners into an organization would be in more often, maybe 4 to 5 days a week. The leaders sort of, supported that because they thought it's important that they're in, that they can learn by osmosis and so on. But actually, when we talked to the junior people, they were saying they don't necessarily learn in that way anymore. So they actively put in headphones, noise cancelling headphones, that kind of thing when they're in an office, because they don't want to overhear things, they can't concentrate and so on. So that has led that organization to kind of relook at what are the best learning environments for people, how do they best learn? And so their conclusion is that they can still offer flexibility to new joiners, junior people, graduates and so on, in order to be competitive and attract them into the organization in the first place, but also to try to reflect what is their preferred learning processes and updating that from the way that maybe it used to be when the leaders joined the organization. So yes, they probably need to be in a little bit more often than others to maximize the learning opportunities, the network building, and also embedding into the culture, but it doesn't necessarily have to be full-time in the office.
Okay, it sort of couples with another question that's just come in regards to the actual choice of days and how that's going to work. There's a lot of people seem to be suggesting that Monday and Friday will want to be the working from home days, and that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday will be the busier in the office. I mean, what's the thought process around that, or how's that going to work?
So in my experience, and Neil and Julian probably have thoughts as well, but again, with the projects that I have been working on, I suppose the organizations have tried to challenge themselves. It's very easy to say 2 to 3 days in the office, but actually there's a fairly fundamental difference between 2 days in the office, which allows you to nearly half the real estate because you can have everyone in on alternative weeks, versus 3 days per week, in which case you need sort of full real estate. But the thinking, I suppose, is also if you're not commuting every single day, that the idea of the Monday and Friday, those days in the week will have a different perception in the future. And particularly in some of the cities, they think that people might want to come in on a Friday because they can have their night out, or they might be out Thursday night and come in on Friday. So I suppose it's a changing perception of those days of the week. Whereas previously, if you're commuting for long times, Monday to Thursday, Friday tends to be the day that you might want off. So there's kind of a couple of ways of coming at it that organizations are looking at.
Okay.
One of the interesting things, Peter, on this topic is if you think about the culture that we've actually had in the organizing of workplace and work, it's very much been a command and control culture from the employer. In other words, I dictate to you when you come in, 9 to 5, I set the rules, you're going to have to work to those rules. I think that's blown up completely. So, and I think it's blown up not because necessarily just of COVID. I think there's been a need for us to actually accept a different kind of work pattern. So I think it's absolute tosh to actually suggest that we're going to end up in a scenario where the company is dictating, you're coming in on a Monday, you're coming in on a Tuesday, and this is the way we're going to set this work plan. So when we talk about hybrid, we need to accept the fact that what it's about is providing flexibility for people to work in the way that they choose to work. And that's how most organizations that want to attract and retain talent and thrive are going to do well, not by dictating a set of rules based on their workplace imperative to save real estate dollars. So I think that's something that I genuinely believe we're going to see much more dynamic movement of people, even to the point where there may be days where everybody is in the office, and there may be days when only a handful are, but that's okay. And I think that's one of the things that it does mean, that the workplace itself needs to be a lot more intelligent so that it actually can know when people are coming, be able to schedule space, to do a whole range of things that we've been trying to do for quite some time, but quite frankly have failed. And I think we're going to see a much more of a living, breathing ecosystem in the office that enables people to work the way that they want to, not the way that they're dictated to by their employer.
Okay.
Yeah, and just on that topic, just to wrap it up from my side as well, I think it goes back to what I was chatting about earlier in the toolkit of it's essentially presenteeism versus productivity. So what is the output? What is the value to the business? I don't care if somebody on my team works from 9 to 5 or they work from 5 to midnight. And what I care about is, have they delivered the output that I need for the business to be successful? And they can choose to do that whenever they need to get it done. Of course, there'll always be exceptions for particular roles that have to be present for a customer-facing role or whatnot. But from a broader perspective, it really boils down to output and productivity and what is the business value that's been delivered.
Okay. There is a question in around artificial intelligence, just and how it could be used in the office or in the meeting space environment. Is that something that's been researched, or is there any feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Neil and maybe Laura has a view on this as well, but we have seen, from a technology perspective, probably the greatest advances in AI in the last year than we've seen before, driven by necessity. And I think that we're not going to be able to achieve a lot of the solutions we need to solve these without an aggressive use of AI. And so the areas that I think we will see, and we already are seeing AI playing a role, is in video. So the ability to be able to automatically reframe and provide composition for an equitable meeting experience. We're seeing AI playing a really big role there. So Zoom have already built that in there, Microsoft doing the same. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming there. You've got people like Pexip that with their composition features, which is pretty awesome. So video, you're going to see a lot. I think audio, you're going to see a huge amount. So the ability for doing what we're doing right now isn't going to stop when we go back into the office. We're going to want to actually be at our desk and have a video meeting. And AI is going to play a role to help support audio. So I hope this works, but I'll give you a demonstration. So I'm going to talk to you right now and I'm going to clap. And I want you to see whether you hear me clapping. So as I'm talking, I'm clapping at the same time. Now, hopefully you heard just me talking and not the clapping. That's artificial intelligence. So basically, we're now seeing in even relatively inexpensive software that you can install on your own PC, AI starting to play a role to cut out ambient noise and be able to support a better meeting experience. So boy, oh boy, are we going to see AI playing a huge role in how technology helps support the kind of work we need to do in the future.
Okay. Neil, there's just a question on meeting equality that you just mentioned. So could you just elaborate on that? What Dropbox are doing in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Julian and Laura chatted a little bit about it as well. But I mean, Dropbox is a traditionally like very San Francisco centric company, and I'm sure many of us are dealing with similar situations. So we may be familiar with that experience of being the only Zoom tile in the room. So you're on a Zoom call or a Teams call, and there's 15 people in a conference room, and you're the only one, and you feel like you're looking in, and you're not an equal participant. And one of the great levelers of COVID was, we all became a tile on the Zoom screen. So suddenly, in all of these meetings that I was in with people in the US, I was suddenly, it was like I was an equal player on the table, right? Because like my screen size was the same as everybody else's, and I wasn't missing out on the side conversations or people going in and out of the room. So what we're afraid of going back to the office or back to the virtual first world is we don't want to go back to that. We don't want to lose that level playing field for all of our staff. So no matter where they're based, if they're in a meeting, we want them to have that equal voice in the room, to feel like they're part of the meeting and they're not missing out on the conversation. So again, Julian mentioned it there, but there's some incredible technology coming down the line, from like cameras to stitch people together and create that virtual experience of being around a conference table. I always joke about the video clip from Demolition Man in 1990, whatever it was, where they had that virtual conference table and the chairs moving around. But like, it's that idea that, whether you're in the room in the US or in the conference room in Dublin, you could be on the west coast of Ireland on the video, and you should still feel like you're an equal player in that meeting, and you can contribute to it and have your voice heard just as readily as if you're in the room.
The challenge we have, though, Neil, is that 99% of conference rooms today were not designed to provide the experience you've just described. Most people's experience is a dirty, great piece of wood with chairs around it, with somebody with a pinhead at the end of the table. That's the kind of video experience that you would have otherwise. So we've got some work to do.
Yeah, I mean, and again, from our perspective, like, technology is not the solution. It's a combination. It has to be technology, it has to be room design and layout, and it has to be behaviors. So it has to be all three. If all three don't play together nicely, it's going to fall apart.
Laura, you're going to talk on that?
Neil's just made exactly my point, because I think absolutely technology is the enabler, but then it's, I suppose, people understanding the technology and actually using it, but also their behavior, both from an individual contributor, so understanding how to work in this new world as it's emerging, but also the chairperson and the leader behavior of how to ensure they're including people as well. So Neil made exactly my point.
Okay, so there's just a couple of questions just around the right to disconnect. I know you discussed, you've had it in, but just with the globalization, with where do we sit in regards to? One of the questions is, how do I take a holiday? What's my right to disconnect taking a holiday? Anybody? Laura,
I'm going on holiday in 2-3 weeks time, but it's Cape Cod, so you know, wonderful. It's a drive. I don't get to fly anywhere. Look, I think the point that Neil and Laura raised right now is that yes, there's a lot of technology going on. There's a lot of things that will help us to work differently and better. But all of that has to have purpose, and all of that has to support not only the well-being, but also the emotional centering of people as well. I think a lot of people have actually been under huge stress. We're seeing this significantly in education right now with young people. That's actually resulting tragically in a higher rate of suicide, especially with young men. There's a whole range of different issues that this situation has actually occurred. And I think what we have to recognize is that work is about how we contribute to our success as an organization, and how we look after each other, and how we grow and thrive as an organization. That's very different from that command and control sort of centered environment we talked about earlier, which is you will do these activities and you will turn up on these days. So it's culture that needs to change, along with policy and process. Now, my daughter has just got her first full-time job. She sent me her job offer with all of her benefits, and I said, well, you don't need to worry about healthcare and what have you. I'm covering you still on that. And then I looked at her vacation deal, and it actually said, as a company, we believe in giving you unlimited vacation. You can take as much time as you like. And there was a whole set of rules around that, and I was like, wow. And I know Branson was doing that, and various different organizations, but suddenly that we're starting to see a culture which is, you know what, having rest time and time to yourself is really important. And so therefore, we're not going to dictate to you what that's going to be. You need to take it, but bear in mind that we still need to achieve success as an organization, and we need to look after each other. I genuinely hope, especially in the States where you get like 2 days vacation a year, that becomes a total change in the way we think about work-life balance. And I really hope that it will actually come to fruition.
Yeah, just sorry, Laura, I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on this topic as well. But certainly from the Dropbox side, we also have unlimited PTO. However, like, it can be a double-edged sword, where when you know you have 20 days or 25 days, it's like a target that you can work towards. When you have unlimited PTO, there's this like unknown voice in your mind that's saying like, well, should I take this time off? You know, because it's unlimited. Like, how many is too many? What's too few? What's too few? So from the Dropbox side, again, we're very passionate about ensuring our staff are well looked after, where we have the Unplugged PTO program, which enables people to disconnect when they do take vacation. And the other thing that we try and do is, like, we have metrics and reports that monitor our staff to make sure that they're actually taking time off. You know, so triggering alert, like a burnout alert to a manager, where we have an automated process that would ping somebody and say, hey, did you know that Laura hasn't taken any time off in 6 months? You know, you might want to do something about that, so that we can proactively ensure that we don't fall into that trap of just being busy and always on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just reinforce, I think particularly what Julian said, is that there is a culture shift to be much more about self-manage and give people the autonomy to make the right decisions for them, how they can thrive and how they can do their best work. But I think, as ever, when there's sort of a shift in culture, there's this mid-generation of who are learning to make it work, and it's incumbent, I suppose, on organizations to help them make it work, and that it's not just down to them and their leader and their kind of microcosm. That the role within the organization is, like Neil says in Dropbox, there are some checks and balances in there to make sure that this works for everyone as we move into this kind of new phase of culture of working.
I think in addition to that, that suspicion that people working remotely from home are skiving, which used to be a lot of the culture that existed in organizations, hopefully now that's gone. And a realization that actually people have been working harder than they've ever worked before, and more productive on that basis, because of all of the other distractions they haven't had. Now, that's not sustainable, because, you know, we've suffered in other ways, but hopefully that for most organizations, maybe not Goldman Sachs, is you know, a cultural shift that we should welcome, And that level of trust, I think that what that's doing is it's building a level of trust between employer and employee that hopefully will enable us to do a whole range of other things. And I think that's been one of the good things, hopefully, that has come out of this tragic, horrible event.
Guys, fascinating. Thanks very, very much for your feedback. Greg, I'm going to ask you just to wrap up if you don't mind, and keep in mind the survey at the end. But thanks everybody for their questions. Thanks for your presentations and your content. It was really relevant and good. And thank you, Greg.
Thank you again. Yes, this event has been recorded. So if you have, if you want to pick up or you've missed anything, all participants, panelists are on LinkedIn, which is the common way of connecting. So I'm sure if you need to have any questions, either direct them to ourselves or with the panelists themselves. Psychological safety was mentioned, I think it was Neil, and that there's an incumbency for it to be modeled. And as leaders, there's a paradigm that some course I did a while back where all eyes are on the boss at all time. Now, we're not in the office to be seen. However, there is a necessity to be that model for that aspect of psychological safety. So I'm gone for the next 2 months, Peter. So, but in a real mode, it is important to watch out, and not all firms will have the luxury of getting automatic alerts. So it is a greater challenge to pick up on people's engagement or lack of. Thank you once again. This is the second in the series. The response to both has been significant. It just shows you, back to Julian's early point, that there's a lot of unknowns still, but we're starting to know the unknowns. So it'll be very interesting. I think we're living through history in front of our eyes in a way that we've never done before, because we're all in it together. So again, thank you. And we hope to see you virtually soon, and even more importantly, in person soon. Thank you again. I think we'll end at that. Thank you, Julian in the US. Have a good day. And Neil in Balbriggan and Laura in Dundrum.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.